Hi, and welcome to Real Clear Fetish Talks Real Clear Play, a podcast that dives into kink and sober life. And this week, I have yet another guest who also resides in Berlin, and that is Stu. Hi, Stu.
Hi there.
How are you?
I'm uh I'm pretty good. Yeah. Like I said, bit of a cold, but it's not bad.
A little post Berlin Easter cold, yes.
A little gift. I was left with a little gift.
A little gift, but I've magically enough I've avoided getting a cold with the amount of men I kissed over Easter. It's a wonder I actually got out without a cold.
Lucky you. Yeah.
Well, I'll see when I go to the clinic in a couple of weeks how that goes.
Yeah.
So like with every episode I do, I start with four standard questions and then we just see where the conversation goes.
Okay.
What do you prefer I call you? Name, pronouns, and title.
I'm Stu, he, him pronouns, and I'm a Gestalt therapist and a drug and alcohol counselor. And soon I will be a social worker, sort of focusing on human rights. But I guess I'm simply a psychotherapist who works mostly with gay men and sexualized drug use.
Fantastic. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Oh, that's a big
Just just
question.
a just a short version, and then we explore a little bit more later on.
Sure. Okay. Well, I am from Australia. I'm from just outside Melbourne. And I've spent most of, well, I've lived in a few different places over the years, but mostly I've worked as a psychotherapist and a manager and team leader of drug rehabs in Australia and Thailand over the last 20 years. And in my private practice, I predominantly work with gay and bisexual men and men who have sex with men. And, the kind of base work that I do is chemsex, sexualized drug use, and drug addiction. However, I also do a lot of work with sex addiction, minority stress, and any of the sort of minority stressors that affect LGBTIQ people, and why they feel they need therapy for that, I guess. And
Fantastic.
sorry, now and I'm living in Berlin now because I'm doing a International Masters of Social Work and Human Rights. That's why I've been here for the last 2 years.
Oh, fantastic, fantastic. Completely sober, clear-headed, or social drinker?
I'm completely clear-headed, I guess. I've been sober since January the 20th, 20, 2020, so 4 and a bit years. And prior to that, I was sober for 16 years. I just had a little slip up in Berlin and tried out using again. But yeah, these days I'm completely abstinent.
What is clear play to you, and why is it important?
Clear play?
Clear play, sober play.
Um, well, I mean, to be honest, I've never thought of this as a concept. It's the first time I've heard of it
Mm.
because I don't really um sort of categorize when I'm having sex what kind of sex it is. I mean, I don't even know when often the people I'm having sex with, whether they are using a chemical or not using a chemical, unless it's really, really obvious, which it can be
Mm.
sometimes with some chemicals. Um, I personally, I really enjoy sober sex when I'm very much attracted to the other person. And, especially like if I'm falling in love with them or if I'm in love with them, sex can be, for me, if I had to choose between a description of me being sexual or sensual, I mean, definitely I'm sexual, but I would say I'm more sensual. So I like touch and I like kissing very much. And I like being able to feel the kind of oxytocin being released in my body when I'm with somebody else, which I only will notice really if I'm completely sober. Um, but at the same time, my most recent relationship, they used chemicals and, you know, but they didn't overdo it or anything like that. So, frequently, I guess I would be sober and they weren't, but it didn't make a difference to the, the quality of the sex.
So you say you 16 years sober and now 3 and a bit years sober. What
Four and a bit, I think.
four and a bit, sorry, 4 and a bit. What brought you to become sober? What's your story?
Yeah, well, I was a very good boy, and brought up on a farm, and you know, I think in a nutshell, what happened for me was when I came out as gay, I sort of been very much into vanilla sex and not very naturally exploratory as a person. And then I started, exploring sex and the gay scene and everything. And then when I was 27, I met a guy who was a sex worker, and he didn't have a 9 to 5 job, but I found him really fascinating and exciting, and he partied on weeknights, and he introduced me to doing sex work, and I um I feel like that just opened a kind of part of myself which was like wanted to explore a whole lot of different things. So we both became well, he was already a sex worker, I started doing sex work. It became a very complicated relationship because I discovered soon enough that I would get quite jealous when he was seeing clients, and also I was only 27. I didn't have good communication skills. I didn't know how to deal with my feelings. I didn't even know what a boundary was. I had none of the therapeutic tools that I have today, and I just think that we were kind of like a explosion waiting to happen. And when I couldn't deal with, a lot of my feelings around the relationship, I increased my use of drugs, particularly crystal meth and GHB and ecstasy and MDMA, party drugs, basically.
Mm.
We don't have methadone in Australia, so that was never in the equation. But I to try and deal with my feelings about the relationship and the fact that it was not working, I increased using drugs. And it wasn't called Chemsex in 1997. It was, I mean, it didn't really have a name. It
No.
did in the US. It was party and play, but we didn't really use that in Australia either. But that's what I was doing, basically Chemsex. And like, it was exploding in Australia at the time, and it was very available. And what made it worse was I went to the US after I broke up with that relationship to study. I was doing an exchange program with McGill University in Montreal, and I was going down to New York frequently, where crystal meth and GHB was just exploding as well. So I was very much in the firing line, and basically I just started to use more and more drugs there to deal with, my feelings. And before I knew it, I had a pretty bad drug problem. Yeah.
It's when it comes to drugs and so on, it just sneaks up on you. It's not something you notice is happening. Um, was there any situation where you kind of realized, okay, I need to change something?
Oh
What
yeah. Yeah,
it,
yeah.
I know a lot of people refer to the rock bottom. Did you have one or
I
anything
mean,
like?
I definitely had a rock bottom, but I mean, there were moments along the way before I even hit rock bottom where I was trying to change my behavior. I mean, interestingly enough, I used to keep a journal back then, and I can remember discovering my journal since I got sober and got into recovery and reading it. And I remember reading, oh, I've been on Fire Island and I've been having unsafe sex, and this is before PrEP and even before the HIV medications were really working successfully, it was actually around the same time. And I remember reading journal entries saying I need to get this under control because I'm either going to get HIV or I'm going to die of a GHB overdose or something. And I remember noticing it on quite a number of the pages. So like, that was the first time I was aware of it. And just while I was living in the US, different friends would say to me, because the first drug I had a problem with was GHB. So I would pass out at nightclubs and, overdose in the worst places. And different friends, once I'd sobered up, would say, Stu, this is out of control. really going to hurt yourself, and people are not wanting to have you around at parties. So the difficult thing was, and now that I'm a drug and alcohol counselor and a psychotherapist, it's easy to tell someone, hey, change your behavior or stop using drugs. But when you're the person having the problem, it's not, it's not easy just to go, oh yeah, sure, I'll stop using drugs, because you don't realize that there's a whole lot of motivating factors behind it that are driving that forward, which I only discovered, 5 years later, when I ended up in long-term rehab and sat with therapists and counselors and groups and discovered all those issues, that.
Mm.
So, I mean, and then my rock bottom was when I started to get drug-induced psychosis, which was very severe. And in the end, anytime I used an amphetamine, I would instantly go into drug-induced psychosis, which was terrifying. It was like being in a nightmare that you can't get out of. And when that repeated itself often enough, that was when I really got serious and thought, if I don't do something about this, I'm going to really risk my life. Because there were times where the voices told me to cut my wrists when I was in psychosis, or to drink poison. And fortunately, I never did. But, I've had multiple friends die from these same incidents when they were in psychosis. And I'm just so glad that I never listened to the voices closely enough to follow that direction.
Yeah, psychosis, I talk to so many people who suffer with psychosis from drug taking, and I'm one of them. And this is also what made me change, mainly because I got scared. My psychosis more is around paranoia and just thinking my phone was hacked and so on. I luckily didn't experience, I think I experienced it like 2, 3 times, and that was enough for me to kind of go, okay. As soon as that switch is flipped, it's going to happen every time. It's the weird. As soon as that path is made in your brain, you'll go back to that every time. So you say you deal with you're a psychotherapist, you deal with drug addictions and so on. When did you start that career?
Well, when I ended up in rehab, I had been basically trained as a school teacher, and I wasn't really very happy. I was a bit wayward with it. And then when I was in rehab, which was 2003, I remember, because I was there for 11 months in 2003. I was there a very long time, but I was watching the psychologists and the counselors working. And after about 3 months, I thought, wow, this is so exciting what they do, because we got to see them do it in front of us
Hmm.
with clients. It doesn't happen sort of in a regular social setting that you get to see in a group psychologists doing work with someone. So, I would frequently be going, God, that looks exciting. Like, that looks more exciting than being a school teacher. I'd love to do that. And also just seeing, like, even my own experience, I was very fortunate to have a Gestalt therapist as my therapist in rehab. And she did some incredible chair work and inner child work with me, getting me to reconnect with my sort of 4 or 5-year-old wounded child. Oh my God, it was just explosive. Like, the discoveries I made, and the pain that I felt that had been there for so many years. And I remember that particular experience, and just thinking, oh my God, I would love to be able to give that experience to other people. Funnily enough, I am trained in inner child work and Gestalt therapy now. So, like, you know, just this week, I've done 2 of those exact, chair work replications with clients, and it's just so powerful. But so I guess, sorry to get a bit off track, but in a
Fine.
nutshell, once I finished rehab, I mean, I did have a bit of imposter syndrome. I thought, oh, who do I think I am to be that I could be a therapist? So I waited about a year and a half, and then when I moved back to Sydney, I heard about this new psychology school that had opened up that people were saying was really good. And so I made an application, I got accepted, and I thought, you know what, I'm just going to do a graduate diploma in counseling. And what have I got to lose? At least I'll learn a whole lot of really interesting stuff. And if it turns out I'm a terrible counselor, then I still will have learned something. So I started doing that. And even before I finished it, I got offered a job in a drug rehab in Sydney, where I started out. And the same year I opened my private practice, which was 2008. So I guess I've been working as a therapist now for about 16 years. Yep, formally. And and then my progression came. I mostly worked in drug rehabs just as a counselor or a crisis support worker or a group worker. And then the last 5 years before coming to Berlin, I got asked to go and manage a LGBTIQ rehab in Thailand called Resort 12, which was a great opportunity to create the program there and run it, manage it. And then as soon as I got back to Australia during the pandemic, I got the opportunity to team lead and manage a mainstream therapeutic community just outside of Melbourne. So the last 5 years have been more sort of stepping into team leader manager roles.
Fantastic. It's there's so much to kind of look at there. So you got into rehab, you started doing the work. You do have to explain to me, what does the Gestalt mean? There might
Yeah,
be people who don't know what that is as well.
yeah. Well, I mean, it's Gestalt is a German word, which basically, when I was being trained, people used to say that the direct translation is form or some, which I don't think is very helpful. All the years I was studying Gestalt, I was like, that doesn't really help. And then when I came here to Germany 2 years ago, I would see the word Gestalt everywhere and I would translate it into the context of how it was written. And for me, it always came up as either pattern or design. And so I think the best way to understand Gestalt is that it's about how we are designed, but it's also about how we are patterned, how we develop patterns of behavior. And, one of the most commonly used phrases in Gestalt therapy is creative adaptation or creative adjustment. And what that means is, like, when you're growing up in the world, if you're not shown how to do something or to cope with a situation, human beings will creatively adapt to that situation. Like, for example, I had a client today who was saying, they grew up in a family with high overachieving parents and a, very successful brother, and they felt like a failure. And they also, in that Italian family, there was lots of food and bread and past given. So like he creatively adapted by eating huge amounts of food to comfort himself from feeling not as good as the rest of his family.
Mm,
Obviously, that doesn't actually work for very long. And, a number of my clients have these same creative adjustments, because when traumatic things happen, a parent dies or parents fight and they separate, or you're molested as a child or something, that kid has to somehow adapt and learn how to cope. And usually they're not very functional. I mean, they're functional enough to keep the person alive. But what I do as a therapist is we try and get to a point where you let go of the dysfunctional creative adaptations and learn how to take on board more functional ones. But I mean, it would take me ages to explain Gestalt fully, but in a sense, it's just a German modality of psychotherapy, and it was created by a guy called Fritz Perls. And it's very much about the relationship between you and the person sitting in front of you, as opposed to psychiatry, where the therapist is a blank screen and doesn't offer much of themselves. Gestalt is much warmer. And, like I notice the things that happen in the relationship with the client. If they react strongly to me, I will be saying, what happened then? Like,
mm.
was it about what I said that you reacted to? And we have to explore what happens in the relationship between the two of us.
I like that. That's very different to any other therapy I've done. Like the first therapist I had in recovery was a straight man, which always gives us a bit of a challenge, especially in the first assessment session where he's literally making notes and looks like he's going to write a book about me, because there's so many things. It's like, oh, I've never heard of this before, and I've never heard of this before. And that's quite hard sometimes when you're trying to do therapists as an LGBTQ plus person.
Mm.
So having someone like you do this kind of important work where you know the language, if that makes sense. So it's always been in the chemsex area you've been working then.
Well, no, it hasn't actually. I mean, the funny thing about my career is that I've had to work in a lot of mainstream rehabs, and so I've actually worked equally with cis women, straight men, and a lot of the, like, for example, the rehab I started off working in Sydney was all basically straight men. Every now and then we'd get a gay or bisexual person go through, but most of those men were from jails and prisons and stuff. And to be honest, all the rehabs except for the LGBT one in Thailand were all mainstream. So, I mean, I'm equally skilled, if not, even better skilled with working with mainstream clients. In fact, I love working with straight men, because for some reason I don't know, I think they just feel very safe when when they're working with a gay man or something, because they sometimes disclose, things about their lives or their sexual behavior that I'm not so sure they would with a heterosexual counselor or whatever. So I think I like the fact that they feel comfortable enough to do that. And I mean, like, I've heard heard, done, seen every sexual thing more or less, that there is to do. That's not completely true, but, and so like in my earlier years, sometimes I could be quite shocked about, things that people might say in front of me in the room, but it's very rare that I get shocked anymore by anything that someone might say. But yeah, my whole career has been predominantly gay men, but very much comfortable working with everyone else as well.
And you mentioned Thailand, 12, what was its name again?
Resort 12.
Resort 12. I've heard about it in the past. I've definitely known people in recovery that's attended this resort. Can you tell me a little bit about it?
Well, the cabin is the name of the big rehab, and what happened was they expanded in 2016 because they had a men's program and a women's program, an Arabic program and a young men's program. And a couple of the owners were quite LGBTIQ friendly. And they said, why don't we open a LGBTIQ rehab? There wasn't a queer rehab in the rest of the world, literally outside of the US. In the US, they've got about five, but
Yeah.
none outside. So this was the first really of its kind. And they contacted me because they wanted a queer person who had a lot of experience with drug addiction. And a colleague of mine was working for the cabin at the time, and they suggested me. They called me up, and initially, I'd heard about the cabin, but I was kind of like, I had a private practice in Australia, and I was working in a rehab, and I had built a house in the country, and they said, "Oh, would you come and design this program in Thailand and come and live here?" And initially, I was like, "Oh God, no, I couldn't do that. I have this whole life in Melbourne."
Mm.
And the guy who was trying to get me to go over there said, like, you'll be on a Western wage in a third world country, you'll live like a king, you'll have all these great experiences, you can travel. Like, he really, really told me all the positives about it. And I went away for 2 days and I went, you know what? This sounds really good, and not only that, just starting a LGBTIQ rehab, that in itself is fantastic. I think I was worried that it was, I had heard some negative things about this rehab in the past, not in a bad way, but just that they were new and they were, had teething issues and stuff. And I thought, I don't know if I want to be involved with, sort of drama and stuff like that. But in the end, I thought, you know what, I want an adventure and I'm going to take a risk. If it doesn't work out, I'll come back to Australia. And when I got there, it was incredible. They had this purpose-built, amazing, like nothing I've seen in my life before. Fountains, swimming pools, you know, gyms, and the rehab that they basically said, here's the gay rehab. We want you to design the program. Here's the keys, go for it. And I was just like, wow, And it was a fantastic experience because I did design the program and implement it. And then we got six gay men from London to come. Actually, one was from Germany. And basically we did a trial run, which went really well, not too many problems. And then we opened up around the middle of 27, no, it was at the beginning of 2018. And then we just ran it like that for the next 2.5 years until the pandemic happened and killed it. But you know, the fantastic thing for me was because I had this acting background, which I haven't told you about either, but I was very confident talking to the camera. And so like, you know, they discovered this when we were doing promotional stuff for the rehab, and then they went, oh, this is fantastic. So then they started sending me to London and the US, and then I spoke at this conference in Paris and Singapore. And I mean, it was actually turned out to be the best decision I ever made to accept that position.
A fantastic acting career. You can't mention that and not ask about it, because we try to have a little bit of personal information in the podcast as well. Can you divulge a little bit on that?
Yeah. I mean, I'll just tell you the juiciest bits. Like I went to NIDA, which is the top acting school in Australia when I was 19. I was literally in the same class as Toni Collette, and Kate Blanchett was a year ahead of me. And she showed me around Sydney when I moved there. But I didn't finish acting school. I kind of didn't have what it took to do really well, but I continued acting after I left there, and I just mostly did Australian soaps and Neighbours and Home and Away, and you know, like I mean, I did a lot of commercials, and then ended up doing like some kids plays and some theatre and stuff in Sydney. But it's funny, by the time I got sober, which was around 2005, I had decided I got really passionate about being a psychotherapist, and I just left it all behind then.
Well, it's tools you can use, and like you mentioned, they kind of put you in front of the camera to help promote and so on. I definitely sometimes, because you have to be on when you're either doing this or if you do a talk and so on. So those skills come in very much in handy.
Yeah, no, I mean, I didn't even realize. It's just, you know, when they wanted to do the PR stuff, I was just like, oh, well, I know I'm good at this, so like, I'll just, you know, have some fun with it. And they were just like, oh my God, this is working really well. And I think, like I said, the bonus of that was they were suddenly like, let's send him around the world, and I was like, oh, this is great. It works for me. Yeah.
Fantastic. So I met you in Berlin over Easter. Just briefly, you were working in Mr. B, so I said hi there. And also you come on the kink scene. As this is a kink podcast, do you use any of your kinky side in your therapy? You must get people who are also kinky you work with. And I've met therapists in the past that use that as kind of an entrance window, that I am also in that community. We can talk about that.
Yeah, I think it's been really, really helpful to be here in Berlin. And I mean, as soon as I arrived here, I got into a relationship with someone who is heavily into leather and fetish and kink, more than anyone I've ever met, to be honest. And so they introduced me to a lot of concepts and ideas. And, you know, whenever I would wear the leather wrong, he would very definitely tell me. Or if, you know, like I was making any faux pas or things like that. So, but, you know, I probably would have discovered it without him as well. But just, you know, finer details about sexual fetishes and things like that. And I think it's really, really important working with gay men to have that, because, you know, I think I mentioned earlier, I trained as a sex addiction therapist with something called the Patrick Carnes model, which is very Christian based. And I
Mhm.
didn't know that when I was studying it, but um, you know, like I would hate to kind of like think, I could be wrong, but like how a lot of for example, mainstream sex addiction therapists would give direction to, for example, gay men who were talking about fisting or talking about, you know, polygamy, or, you know, some of the more, I guess, extreme concepts that might not be seen in a very positive way by mainstream society. And, you know, I actually did a presentation on Thursday about sexualized drug use to healthcare professionals here. And, you know, one of the slides that I show them is, you know, my top, you know, 15 tips to you as a, you know, person working with chemsex people. And one of them is get very comfortable talking about sex. like in the very early years, I would sometimes be uncomfortable talking about masturbation or talking about douching or talking about fisting or, I mean, anything that you can think of. Being in Berlin and having clients in Berlin, it has really not only helped me, to become super comfortable talking about that and non-judgmental and sex positive, but I think it helps them a lot to, the very fact that, like you said earlier, you don't have to explain anything to me. The amount of time, my first therapist was a mainstream straight man as well, and I wanted to talk about things like how, fisting and different sexual things, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. And I realized reflecting back, it's so important when we're holding on to guilt or shame or feelings about certain sexual behaviors to be able to talk about it so that, any guilt or shame that's being held can be just let go of. But I couldn't even bring myself to do that in early therapy, which kind of held me back for quite a while. And yeah, I sometimes when I'm sitting with clients think, oh, how fantastic for them that, they can sit here and, like a client this week said to me something about, getting fucked by, a whole lot of guys at a party or whatever. Like this is basically our culture, this is the norm for us. And I don't believe that I'm going to do any service to this client by pulling them up and saying, do you think you should be having sex with that many people, or something to that effect. So yeah, definitely having a thorough, I mean, I wouldn't say I have a as good as the guy that I went out with understanding of fetish and kink, but I think I have an extensive understanding of the ins and outs, let's say, of many fetishes and how that makes it easier, hopefully, to allow someone to talk to me about what they need to talk about.
Correct me if I'm wrong. So you would say you've gotten more fetishy when you moved to Berlin?
Yes, that would be true to say yes.
It brought it out, if you could say.
Yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think if I'm being really honest, he brought that out in me, and it was something I enjoyed doing with him, and I
Hmm.
enjoyed being introduced to new things. What I've noticed since we broke up is I'm a little bit reverting back to, what I know, but I think, oh well, I mean that's not actually true because I met someone the other night at New Action and we got a bit kinky and whatever. So like, I mean, I think for me it really depends on who I'm with, to be honest.
Oh yeah, it's I definitely am with people where I'm much more I just kind of want to cuddle and it doesn't have to be heavy gear and stuff like that. It's very much depends on the person and the attitude and so on. If you feel comfortable with this question, I want to explore it mainly because I know it will benefit some other people. You mentioned 4.5 years ago you had a slip up. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, in my case, like, and this might be, maybe some people won't understand this, but my
Mm.
my attachment style is that I'm anxiously attached, which means when I'm in relationships, I get very nervous and anxious, and I usually am attracted to avoidant personality types who are less available, which increases my anxiety. It's too much to go into here right now, but how it relates to my relapse is that I my recovery is based on 12-step program, predominantly Crystal Meth Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous in the beginning before Crystal Meth Anonymous arrived.
Mm.
And, when I moved to Thailand, we really didn't have it. And I just decided, I mean, I just drifted away from 12-step. And, I knew a lot of other therapists that had stopped doing 12-step but stayed sober. And in my mind, I said, well, this is what happens. You get to 13 years sober and, like you're so kind of in control, nothing can knock you off your perch. And so I just stopped doing meetings, stopped talking to my sponsor, and I did stay clean for another 3 years on my own. It's a bit of a strange thing that happened. It was while I was in Thailand, and what happened was there was an avoidant guy that I had been totally obsessed with and in love with and had a 3-month affair with, like in 2016. And while I was in Thailand, for some reason, I clicked on his Instagram. I hadn't looked at it for 3 years, and I got really badly triggered. I saw that he was looking amazing, had a new boyfriend, all the worst things I could have seen after not looking at his Instagram for 3 years. And for some reason, I just got triggered. And this was a week before coming to Berlin for CSD. And I just remember that moment that happened. I went, you know what? I don't think I tried controlled consumption or harm reduction well enough. And also in that space of time, I'd been to a number of harm reduction conferences. And I remember listening to it, and I somehow convinced myself or rationalized I never gave harm reduction a good enough go. Maybe I can control my use.
Mm.
I got to Berlin, I went out to Revolver on the front. I mean, it's quite a funny story, actually. Like, I was in Revolver, and I thought the first guys that offer me drugs, I'm going to take, because I always get offered drugs, but I always usually say no.
Mm.
And these guys, three hot guys, somehow, I got talking to them, and they said, "Do you want some G?" And I was like, "Here it is," right? I said, "Yeah, sure." They pulled out the G, and just as they did, the security guards walked past and tossed all three of them out, and I was just like, "Is this like my higher power trying to protect me?" Like. Anyway, I mean, I was adamant that I wanted to use drugs, so I think someone gave me some MDMA, and anyway, within 12 hours, I had drug-induced psychosis. I had people in my hotel room that I really was not that attracted to. Like, all the worst things that had happened, 16 years prior, all came back, rapidly. And then I had a terrible come down for a week and wasted my whole, 10 days of Berlin time in bed feeling miserable. So I went back to Thailand, and I went, okay, that's it. That was a wrong decision. I'm just going to get sober again. And I did get sober again. And then I got asked to come back to Paris for a conference. And it just happened to be the week after Snacks. It was such a silly thing, that Snacks was on a week before this conference. So obviously I came back. I told myself I wasn't going to use drugs, but when I was here and the energy was hyped up like it was, I went to Snacks and ended up taking drugs again. And you know, again, I told myself this has got to stop. I have psychosis again. And so I used two more times, once in Thailand, which was, it was horrible. I went into psychosis there. It was terrible. And then it was a very international relapse, to be honest, because the last one was in Paris. I was seeing a guy in Paris, and I went to meet up with him, and it was just ridiculous. I was trying to date this guy, but I was running off and hooking up with drug dealers to get drugs. So I could see just over a period of 4 months or 5 months, that nothing good was going to come from, like, I couldn't do controlled consumption, like, I'm just not that person. And so this was, funnily enough, this was all happening just as the pandemic was hitting the world. And so I spoke to my sponsor. I reconnected with my sponsor in Los Angeles. I told him what happened, and he said, "Quit your job, come here to LA, live with me, go to a meeting every day and get sober again." And that's basically what I did. I mean, the pandemic was going to shut the rehab down anyway.
Mm.
So I just took his advice. I went to Los Angeles. I lived with my sponsor. He made me work through the first 3 steps. I went to 12-step meetings every day, and I got clean again, thankfully.
It's interesting you say the thing with Instagram, and you saw a picture and that kind of just triggered something. It's
Yeah.
not more than maybe 2-3 weeks ago. I have a friend who I'm supporting at the moment who's going through trying not to do drugs, also psychosis, intravenous use, stuff like that. And he had a relapse a couple of weeks back, and that was because someone mentioned his ex.
Oof.
So it is so easy to be triggered by the most random crap, and it's normally around people we have strong emotions with, and that's, as addicts, we're reactive people. I think we get better at not actioning the reaction the more sober we are and the more tools we have. But even now, it's as you mentioned, just like you were at 16 years, and then fuck it. I'm at 7 years, and I almost went fuck it last year. And that
Yeah.
was from a medical procedure where I got sedation, and that fucked with my head.
Yeah.
Um, Not that I would say no to sedation in the future. I just have to be really mindful of it
Yeah.
because I know what it does to me, especially someone like me who have ADHD, and anything that calms my brain, I was like, "Ooh, I want more of that." So it's interesting, and this is why I'm so happy I asked that question, because I need to show this episode to my friend because he will recognize this.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people believe that addiction is an attachment disorder, in that it comes from, being anxiously attached or avoidant or having a disorganized attachment style. And, like it when you just mentioned that about your friend and him just hearing the name, like that hit me in the solar plexus because I know exactly what that's like and how like when you're not triggered, how seemingly crazy that kind of is. It's just a name, but it's what that experience and what that person, who that person is, represents, to you, and whatever the story was that went along with that person. And it's I mean, this is why I try to always keep going to 12-step meetings. I send gratitude lists to my sponsor every day. I talk to him when I'm in crisis, and all these are the things that I let slide when I ended up relapsing. So, for me, I choose 12 step as my fundamental base for staying sober, and I just have to remember not to forget it.
Yeah, it's as I say with any episode I do, different ways, different recoveries, and definitely 12 step is a very powerful tool. So I'm really happy that you had that to go to when you needed it. I don't do meetings. I on occasion will dip in. If I feel, like you say, in crisis, or I feel triggered and so on, then I'll dip in. And I know it's there. I know I have contacts and people I can reach out to, and I keep myself accountable for my actions. And am I doing the right things? Am I doing it for the right reasons? Am I going to new action to have fun or to look for something that can fuck me up? Luckily enough, over Easter, and this is amazing to say, I had 4 nights in a row out until 5 in the morning, and I felt fine. And that was a little bit like, I'm running on adrenaline for a very, very long time. I have to be quite mindful of that because I will crash.
Mm.
And that's normally when I become vulnerable.
Yeah.
I was lucky enough that I put things in place like having a day off and having a day off when I came home to relax and so on. I think that's very important, especially when you do high intense events like Easter Berlin. Like if you go to snacks, or if I made a personal choice not to go to snacks over Easter. I considered it, but I wanted to go with sober people if I was going to go. But then some friends of mine were going as well, and they were going to be using drugs whilst there. And I don't mind them using drugs. They can do to the heart's content, but I don't want to see them high. That would be too triggering.
Yeah.
So I knew to keep myself safe, I should not put myself in that situation.
Yeah. 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 I think one of the really fantastic things that 12 step gives you, like whether you, because I know a lot of people do eventually stop going, is that it does give you these kind of tools, as you said, and
Mm.
a balance. It's like for me, I don't know if it was you I said this to when you were in Berlin, but my favorite time of the whole weekend is when I get home to my place after the club and my body's aching and I take a hot shower and I make, some food, and then I get into my bed with a hot water bottle. Like, despite all the kind of crazy sex I might have had or interesting people I might have met or the, you know, crazy things that I've seen happen, it's actually like coming home and being good to myself and gentle with myself that is really good. Whereas, in the past, if I'd gone to snacks, there's every likelihood I could have been out for another 3 or 4 days, in all the craziest places,
Mm.
doing terrible things to myself. harmful things to myself, let alone not eating, sleeping, drinking water, looking after myself. And so I think sometimes that's why that is the most exciting moment for me, because it's not only that I feel so great, it's like I go, and I care about myself today.
Absolutely. So you moved to Berlin to study now. What brought that on? What is the attraction? Of course, Berlin is an attraction as well, but I'm assuming the thing you're studying there is something you knew was in Berlin.
Yeah, I mean, like, the reason I came to study was because it was one way of legitimately and legally moving to Berlin, because I don't
Mhm.
have any ties to the EU. But I always was curious about studying social work, not necessarily human rights, although now that I've studied it, I actually am very interested in human rights. But it was really a way to get here. And, there's probably two reasons why Berlin. One is because have always found it fascinating and exciting. I've been coming here for 12 years, and had my favorite hotel down in Schöneberg that I would stay at. And I would hire a bike every day and just ride around Berlin, always in the summertime. So I never had that experience of the horrible winter.
Mm.
Uh, and so, like, I just kind of fell in love with Berlin in the summer. So that was one of the reasons I wanted to move here. But to be honest, the second reason is that I also felt that I had hit the ceiling in a way of how I could work in Australia. Like, I'd ended up managing drug rehabs there. And, I guess I could have gone on doing that. But I think for me to make full contact with what I want to be doing work-wise, I really want to be working with gay, bisexual, trans, and men who have sex with men engaged in chemsex and sexualized drug use. And while I can do that in Australia, like, I probably had four clients in Australia before I moved here. But to be honest, most of my clients in Australia were straight men and women, which,
Mm.
like I said, I like working with them, but I really, because chemsex is my story, and psychosis is a big part of my story, and contracting HIV is a big part of my story. And, a lot of those things, low self-esteem, difficult relationship with my dad, I really love working with men who I feel that I can make a difference with in this way.
Mm.
And I just feel like I'm going to have more opportunities to do that here in Berlin. Usually when I talk about doing this kind of work in Berlin, people say, well, you're in the right place for it, which is kind of like a joke, but it's also true at the same
Mm.
time. And one of the things I love doing the most here in Berlin is every Wednesday night I co-facilitate an English-speaking drug and alcohol recovery group with a colleague called Aunt Bachelor. And what I love about it is, like, one night we could have 15 people there, and we could have two Russians, a Ukrainian, someone from Ecuador, like someone from Ireland, someone like, just the diversity. We might have three trans people. Like, I don't know, for some reason this makes the work that I do is already exciting, but this just takes it to a whole other level.
Mm.
And I don't know if this sounds arrogant, but I do feel that with all the experiences that I've had and the 20 years of kind of like this journey, I have a lot to offer. And I felt like I could offer that in Australia, but I really wanted to be offering it to, more to queer people. And I would say at the moment in my private practice, I have about 8 or 9 clients, and only one of them is a straight female. The rest of them are all gay men engaged in sexualized drug use. And that's what I came here to do. I have some in the UK, I have a couple in the US, um, 3 or 4 here in Germany. This is what really really where I want to be and what I want to be doing.
Yeah, I want to echo. It's not arrogant. It's if you have the experience, use it. And this is one of the reasons I do the podcast. I am equally bad, like it's like, ooh, I don't want to pat myself too much on the back kind of thing. But it is important. It's important work. And I've definitely gotten confirmed a couple of times, especially in Berlin and when I went to Darklands, that people do actually listen to this. People do watch what I do. And that's quite gratifying and confirming. I don't. I literally have your CV in front of me and your list of things you've done. I've definitely not done that. I talk and I talk of my experience. I don't necessarily have the education behind me, but you do, and definitely use it, and it's impressive. It's I'm so happy to have you on because you have a person, you have all that knowledge and it should be shared. And if you can help, I've always kind of gone, it's like, if it just helps one person, then it's worth blasting it online, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like even if it reached one person and it saved their life, that would be enough. And a few years ago, I started to save in my phone, in my notes section, all the times people had sent me thank yous for the work that I've done. I mean, I think I did it because, sometimes as a therapist, I can have imposter syndrome, or I can have bad days where I think, oh, I didn't really do the best for that client. And I think that's why I started keeping that. But I don't know, I think there's maybe 20 or 25 little messages in there now that I've kept from over the years. And it makes me realize that the work that I do is important and life-saving and necessary. And that is, I mean, a bit like what you're saying with the podcast that you do. I don't want to be negative, but I do feel like the world is in a bit of a fucked up place with wars and, climate change and stuff like that. And I do sometimes go, you know, what can I do to change that? I feel helpless to change that. But it reassures me that I'm doing something,
Mm.
that is making a difference to people's lives. And, maybe with this social work degree, I will move into a whole other area where I can make a difference to people's lives. But I do think I'm happy to be doing the work that I do. And if it if it does help anybody, then that's a win.
Fantastic. We are actually coming to the end of time. We actually run a little bit over time, which is fine because it's not often I have someone on my podcast with a CV like yours. So it's about getting as much out of you as possible. And it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. If anyone's listened and they've clicked something you've said, or they want to re-engage with you through your practice and so on, what can they get a hold of you?
Probably my email is chemsexrecoverystu@gmail.com. That would probably be the easiest way to get hold of me, or, maybe through my Instagram, Chemsex Recovery, or Chemsex Recovery Stu. Email is good though.
Fantastic. I'll put all the information in the blurb at the end, but I'll also put it in the description. So don't worry about that. I'll make sure people can get a hold of you if they need your help, because you're there to help. So it's amazing the work you do, and I'm really happy to have had you on. Just to end the podcast, is there any advice you would give to someone in early recovery that you wished you might have had yourself when you started out?
This is
I,
just such a hard question
I
because,
know.
you know, and I was talking about this, I think, just the other day at the presentation, is like, I don't think any advice or words from anyone in the beginning would have changed the direction of my life. But, because I sometimes feel that because of our past, we have a kind of destiny that we have to go down that road until we get to the point like you have, and I did, where we go, I don't want this anymore. I mean, that being said, if anyone could have said anything, it probably would have been something a little bit cliched, but like, you know, you you are lovable, you are valuable, and never forget this, because that's really what has been the work for me over the last 20 years, where I don't think I really did love myself. at the beginning of the journey. And now, even though I know I still have lots of flaws and faults, I do think that I love myself, and that's a huge accomplishment, I think.
Fantastic. That's a really nice way to round off the episode. Thank you very much for coming on, Stu. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you.
My pleasure. And I didn't know anything about your background either. So like now I have lots of questions, which I'm sure I'll get to ask you in time as well.
Absolutely. I'm very much an open book.
Wonderful.
So that was Stu. It was absolute pleasure to talk to him. It's been lovely to have a good start to this 7th season of my podcast, and having a wealth of knowledge like Stu come on to the podcast and spread some hope, some joy, some advice, some knowledge. It's been absolutely a joy. But I'll see you next time when I drop the next episode. So have a good evening and bye.